33-year-old Louis Anacortes sat on a freshly finished and washed marine teak and iron bench overlooking Riff Lake. In happier times, on countless visits here, he and his family swam on the lake. He studied the freshly polished brass plaque on the bench, donated by the Edmonds family of Mossy Rock in memory of our beloved grandfather, Kennewick Edmonds. This bench is for everyone to enjoy the beauty of the area he loved so much. Louis, as a native of these places, having read the inscription, laughed briefly, sharply, and bitterly. He knew why Old Man Kennewick loved this area, and in particular, this observation deck, where a bench was strategically placed in his honor. From this spot, Kennewick often rested and gazed longingly at the crystal blue water that flooded his childhood home decades ago when the Tacoma City Light Company built the Mossy Rock Dam to generate electricity for the city. Louis knew that the city of Riff was somewhere there, but lay 60 meters below the shimmering surface of the lake, which now reflected a magnificent blue sky and ragged clouds. Under the forest canopy are a variety of native pine trees that surround the lake. Some of the western whites and ponderosas towered over 36 meters into the sky. As a child, Louis always dreamed of climbing to the top of one of them to see if he could touch the endless sky. He had a cherished memory of his late father. One day, when he was a little boy, he and his father were lying on their backs on the shore of a lake and relaxing. Their vintage bamboo HL rods. Leonard was leaning against a tree. They were tuned in to the salmon that thrive in these waters. They looked up at the sky, admiring the amazing work of nature, and at the same time, relaxing. He told his father about his desire to climb to the top of one of the pine trees. The father was silent for several minutes and didn't even pay attention to Louis's statement. Just when Louis thought his father must have missed his words, he began humming a line from Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze. "Forgive me while I kiss the sky." His father was a terrible singer. He could not bring out the melody, even to save his own life, but this never stopped him from singing. As his father's voice repeated this line, teenage Louis looked around in embarrassment, praying that no one would witness him sing. However, in adult life, this incident was pleasantly and indelibly etched in his memory. Louis lost both of his parents to cancer when he was very young. This fact, as well as his understanding of genetics, was one of the reasons why this meeting happened. Life is too short. Louis's attention was now drawn to the lake itself. Nearly 23 miles long, it is so deep that no light could penetrate the darkness that shrouded the once vibrant, close-knit community of Riff. The darkness hid all evidence that it had ever existed, for it would never again be visible in the light. Louis considered this an apt metaphor for his marriage. To any passerby not familiar with the nightmare Louis had been living through lately, he would appear to be serenely soaking up the solitary beauty of the warm fall weather that occasionally visited the Pacific Northwest. Locals still call this phenomenon, despite its current political incorrectness, Indian summer. When it comes, there is no more wonderful time and place on earth. It almost makes 9 long months of dreary rain seem bearable. Although Louis looked calm on the outside, he was seething inside. He had to go through this nightmare alone. He was an only child and didn't have many friends outside of the firehouse. Louis couldn't talk to any of the guys at the station about his problems because, unlike how they are portrayed on TV, firefighters don't spend all their free time talking about their fears and emotions, sharing intimate moments with their fellows. No one dares to show weakness in front of others, fearing that they will lose confidence in him. Their lives depend on each other, and even a moment's hesitation, caused by the uncertainty that they could trust someone to do the right thing under extreme conditions, could prove fatal. No, Louis was completely alone in this. He purposely arrived early because, in truth, he was counting on the healing powers of his beloved lake and nature's magical natural oil to help him survive this meeting that his soon-to-be ex-wife had asked for. She actually demanded it, and his lawyer said it would be in his best interest to grant the request. "It'll look good in family court," his lawyer instructed him. Moreover, His lawyer was growing increasingly frustrated with Blaine's constant creation of obstacles to delay the inevitable. Lewis couldn't understand why Blaine kept insisting that their marriage could survive her madness. She wants her lawyer to require a mandatory consultation. It doesn't matter to her that in Washington state, a family court judge can't appoint her. Both lawyers tried to talk to Blaine until they were blue in the face, but to no avail. Lewis thought that Blaine definitely needed some kind of therapy, but that was no longer his concern. Well, he sighed, thinking to himself, it will all end today anyway. Blaine could have demanded a meeting, but Lewis insisted on the spot. He knew that the summer crowds would be a distant memory, so they would most likely have the place to themselves. This meeting doesn't go the way Blaine expects. He glanced briefly at his watch. She should arrive in a few minutes, but he knew he actually had plenty of time. On the one hand, Blaine would have to travel a considerable distance on Highway 12, which she hated. She never got anything done on time, including their wedding. She was an hour late for that one. He let out that same cynical chuckle as the quick memory of it came to him. Thought he'd better leave the church 20 minutes late, as his best man had jokingly suggested over 13 years ago, but he quickly discarded this thought. The truth was that the first 12.5 years of his marriage to Blaine had been a perfect dream. Lewis loved his two daughters, Rainier and Lacey, more than life itself. Rainey, as she was called, was a daddy's girl through and through. She was already studying and preparing to become a firefighter, just like her idolized father. On the other hand, Lacey was his wife's mini-me. For Lewis, this turned out to be just one of many difficulties. Family courts do not like to separate children. That and the fact that, in Washington state, family law does not set an age that allows a child under 18 to choose which parent to live with during a divorce. However, according to the lawyer, all is not lost. Although complex, Washington divorce and child custody laws allow a husband and wife to jointly submit a child care plan to the court. If the judge finds that the plan is detailed, complete, and financially fair for the children, he will usually sign it without changes. The trick, the lawyer told him, was to get his wife to agree to. The very difficult proposal Lewis wanted his wife to accept. Lewis was a realist. Even before his lawyer confirmed it to him, he realized that his job as a firefighter for the Riverside Fire Department, known as RFA, would almost certainly prevent him from getting primary custody of his daughters. The dangerous nature of the work and the shifting work schedule were almost insurmountable barriers to consideration of custody. It took time and money, a lot of money, to develop the plan he put into motion. He closed his eyes and thought back to that terrible day several months ago when his nightmare existence began. He couldn't decide whether his current life was an episode of The Twilight Zone or the movie Groundhog Day. Its reality is both surreal and terrifyingly repetitive. "Lewis, honey, can we talk in the living room? Please." He had just completed his pleasant nightly ritual of putting the girls to bed in their shared bedroom when he heard her voice. Although he needed sleep because his next 24-hour shift began tomorrow morning, he was eager to talk to his wife. He hoped Blaine wanted to continue discussing their shared desire to buy their own home. The four of them lived in a rented 3-bedroom apartment and were eager to own their own forever home now that their careers were secure. Both agreed that it was much better to raise their daughters in their own home. It's more permanent. On his way to the living room, he looked into the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerator. He sank down onto the worn sofa they had inherited from their parents and turned to Blaine, crossing his right leg over his left so that he was facing her. He ruffled Blaine's flowing blonde hair that always covered her ear for a moment, then carefully tucked it behind the shell of her ear and placed his hand on her shoulder. "How are you, sweet?" He didn't remember much after that. His memories of their conversation were mostly fragmented, heart-piercing stabs in a kaleidoscope of shock, disbelief, and anger. However, his reaction was crystal clear. Months later, he was still embarrassed by how shockingly weak and emotional his reaction was. He cried, really cried in front of her. It was so pathetic that he could feel pity from Blaine. Stumbling, he left the house and walked away from the source of his torment. One good thing about being a firefighter is that there is always a free bed to sleep on. No one ever questioned his constant presence. Everyone knew the statistics on divorce at work. After a few days, he was able to piece together what his wife had told him. She didn't ask permission, she just said what she was going to do. When he finally returned home, he was going to beg his wife not to destroy their family. He was going to beg her to go to counseling with him, to find out how to save their marriage. But before he could begin, he was immediately ambushed by his loving and innocent daughters. Blaine promised him that they would come to her parents' house for the meeting. He turned and looked at his wife, who stood there with a sly, victorious grin on her face. The love he once felt for her is long gone. Now it was replaced by burning hatred. He glanced at Blaine, his usually calm face contorted with rage bordering on murder. For a moment, her look of superiority faded and was replaced by fear. But it was at this moment that his girls began to attack him. In their blissful ignorance, they begged to know why he was leaving them. He literally had to fight his way out of Rain and Lacey's desperate embrace as they begged and screamed and cried. Rain was the hardest. "Dad, how can I become a firefighter without you?" He knew that this scene would play in his head over and over until the day he died, no matter the outcome. Lewis, however, knew that the alternative would be worse for his ladies in the long run. In the end, he was grateful to Blaine. In an instant, he went from a weak victim to a man whose path was clear. One day, Lewis mentally thanked her. He regained his dignity and took the first step towards recovery. Today, he thanked her. "I know it's hard for you girls, and I hope one day you'll understand me. Your mother and I just grew apart. We want different things from life. But I promise you that I will never leave you. I will see you often and love you forever." He never looked back at Blaine. When he was finally freed from the clutches of his girls, he purposely walked out of his apartment one last time. Since that day, Lewis has not said a word to his soon-to-be ex-wife. Wisely, I let my lawyer speak for himself. Lewis didn't know whether he had dozed off, or whether he was so immersed in his memories that he simply lost track of time. "Hello, Lewis. Thanks for meeting with me. Our daughters miss you very much." Her voice, which had once been an encouraging and caring greeting to him, scratched his mind like nails on an old chalkboard. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. "It's showtime. My lawyer, Blaine, told me to do this. In a perfect world, I would never have to look at your ugly face again." He didn't even look in her direction. I looked straight at the lake, seeking strength in its calm familiarity. He heard her shocked gasp. Yes, she thought this session would go differently. Lewis couldn't help but smile and look at her. "I know this is at your expense, Blaine, but I have to tell you something before you start. This is our last conversation on this topic. If you repeat even one of those ridiculous reasons that you repeated ad nauseum, that it would supposedly make our marriage stronger, if you tell me again how much you love me, if you say that it's just my fragile male ego getting in the way, if you even hint that I am to blame for the destruction of the family, I will immediately get up and leave here. At the moment, you are so disgusting to me that your mere presence makes me physically sick. Lewis, I don't know." Lewis was sure Blaine was getting ready to repeat his sickening "but I love you both" speech and raised his hand to her face. "Let me save you the trouble, Blaine. Do you see this?" He pointed to the large, ubiquitous manila envelope on the seat of the bench. "These are divorce papers that will end our marriage. When you leave here in a few minutes, you will take them with you. You will sign them after your lawyer has reviewed them. Return them to my lawyer's office within 36 hours. He turned away from her to admire the breathtaking view once more, and then continued. "Your lawyer will confirm that everything here meets the state's parenting plan requirements, but I do not want, and I don't want a cheating wife, so we'll both end up getting a divorce. Now pay attention because this is important." Lewis sighed in disappointment. Although deep down he knew that Blaine would make everything even more difficult than necessary. "The parenting plan is what the family court looks at the most. What I am suggesting is fair. We don't have much savings, so the rest will be divided in half. You will have custody of the girls." "What? Aren't you going to fight me for this?" Blaine snorted. "Of course not. Girls need a mother, and despite being a really shitty wife, you were a decent mother, so no. And you will have an apartment so that the girls don't have to change schools or look for new friends. I will pay half the cost of housing and pay more than the minimum required amount of child support. I will also have plenty of dates with my girls. Everything is spelled out here." At that moment, a huge amount of emotions ran through Blaine's head. She was surprised, happy, and disappointed at the same time. She counted on Lewis's love for his daughters to keep him home and their marriage. It was at this point that Blaine began to realize exactly what she had lost and began to cry in earnest. "Look, Blaine, the reality is that with my work schedule and the risks of my job, I know there's no way I'm going to get custody of the girls. Even if you had sex with the entire Seahawks football team on the 50-yard line at halftime of a playoff game, it wouldn't change the fact." But, Lewis, can't we—" "Don't interrupt, Blaine. We're just getting to the main point. You should pay very, very close attention to this next part." He narrowed his eyes at her impatiently, took a thick, letter-sized envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. She opened it and began looking through the contents. "As I said, if within 36 hours the divorce papers are not signed and on my lawyer's desk exactly as they are written, all your family members, your colleagues, your manager, and everyone else who did you ever know they'd get a copy of what's inside. This is your copy. Here is a detailed account in vivid colors of what you did to end your marriage. And, more importantly, a record of what you required me to accept as part of continuing my marriage to you. It was expensive, but worth every penny Lewis spent to get the investigator's report. I will also make sure my daughters know exactly how and why their family was destroyed." Blaine was clearly shocked by what she saw. She couldn't imagine that this was true. No, it must be a lie. Her lover could not be such a person. Lewis is lying. Lewis honestly wasn't sure he had the courage to go through with it, as it would hurt his girls too much. But on the other hand, he never thought that he would have to resort to this nuclear option. It could also land him in jail and without a job. Retaliation porn laws were a double-edged sword. He also had high hopes that her lover would turn out to be who Lewis thought he was. And, most importantly, Blaine is as subservient and trusting as this asshole seems to be. The main thing here, Blaine, is that they should be signed exactly as I suggest. If your lawyer calls mine and says, "My client and I," or if he changes even one comma, period, or semicolon, the gloves will be off and your entire world will know what a piece of crap you are. Blaine, shocked to the core, continued to leaf through the investigator's report. She could only continue to make meaningless sounds, sniffle and cry throughout Lewis's monologue, simply shaking her head in disbelief. It shouldn't have happened this way. Why can't Lewis understand? Of course, I'm offering a quid pro quo, so here's what I'm willing to do in exchange for your cooperation. I promise that I will never speak ill of you or blame you for the breakup of our family in the eyes of my daughters. I'll even be polite to your boyfriend if we end up at one of the girls' parties together. Hell, I'll even shake his slippery hand if I have to. In every way, I will behave in a polite and civilist manner, as if we had simply decided to amicably part ways. I will do the same with each of your family and friends. I'll even babysit if you and the Slytherin want to go somewhere for the weekend at the last minute. In short, I will be the best ex-husband for any cheating wife. Thank you, Lewis, but this is all so unnecessary, cha. Stop, Blaine. Don't ever mention that piece of shit's name in my presence. Lewis, he's a good guy. He doesn't... No, Blaine, it's not like that. Damn, let's get down to business. Whose idea was it to tell me about your relationship? Him, Lewis. He said that it is not good to deceive such a good person like you. Lewis laughed caustically, interrupting Blaine. Nonsense, Blaine. He did this to ensure that he would get the exact same reaction from me as you did. Has he already asked when he can move in with you? Her eyes opened wide at the same time as her mouth. Lewis thought it looked exactly like one of her favorite emojis that she liked to use. Blaine was silent. She looked at her hands, which she was squeezing furiously. Her posture was so rigid and fragile that it seemed as if she was afraid that the slightest movement would cause her to turn into a column of dust. "I thought so, Blaine. All this is written in the report that you are holding in your hands." Lewis pointed his fingers at the papers in her hands. "You're not his first, and you won't be his last. His track record is here. He's not like that. He really loves me." She spoke so quietly that Lewis had to strain to hear her pitiful words. This brought a knowing smile from him. He exhaled slowly, and a peaceful calm came over him, as if another gentle breeze from his beloved lake was washing his face. It's almost over. He knew he had chosen the right path. He understood that there was a risk, but now everything was under control. He was confident that everything would fall into place as he wanted. His voice softened significantly. "Look at me, Blaine. We're almost done. It is important that you be very careful." She looked up at him. Her tear-stained face was a mask of confusion, ruined mascara, and fear. Her ideal world was destroyed. When she finally looked into Lewis's eyes, she saw a stony, threatening face with eyes as black as night glaring at her. "Take care of my girls, Blaine." "They are our girls, Lewis," she protested weakly. Her timidity made it sound more like a question. "No, Blaine. It's not like that. They are my girls. You betrayed them and threw them away just like me because you are weak and cannot keep your legs closed. I need you to take care of them for me, at least for a couple of years." "What are you talking about?" The smell of her fear could almost be felt. "I will never give them away. I already gave it away. You just don't realize it yet. One way or another, your boyfriend will take care of it." He spoke completely seriously. "Has he already used this phrase in relation to you? Baby, just take a little of this. It will make our sex so much better. Our lovemaking will be so intense that you cannot even imagine. All your nerve endings will burn. Here, just wash it down with a little of this." She looked at her hands again, bashfully. "Soon he will start sharing you with his friends." "Come on, baby. Justin is such a good guy. Don't you want to see what it's like to be loved by several men at the same time for once?" Blaine shook her head slowly, staring into space, muttering, "He won't do that to me. He loves me. Fuck you, Blaine. In a few months, this idiot will be forcing you into his favorite bars." Lewis was on fire. "But the good news is that I still have a couple of years before I finish the courses required for my bachelor's degree in fire safety. Then I can apply for the fire marshal position when Frank retires. Then I will have almost no compulsory hours. This should be the time when you start to crash and burn. That's when I'll sue for full custody. By then, you'll probably be so stoned that you won't even care." "You're wrong. He's not like that at all. Please, Lewis, I really love you. I love our family. Why can't you see—" "No, you don't see it," Lewis growled at her. "You've never seen it. Honestly, I don't think you're capable of loving anyone but yourself. I was simply blinded by love for who I thought you were. I was just a convenient support for you. The girls only cemented your power over me. When your asshole boyfriend showed up, you played into his hands. You threw away your family like yesterday's sour milk." Maybe we can start over?" she suggested with tears in her eyes. "No, Blaine, we can't. There was nothing left to start with. Besides, you won't give up on him because then your failure as a wife, mother, and person will be exposed for everyone to see. No, you will continue to pretend that you and the asshole are happy and love each other. You deliberately follow the path of self-destruction because you have no choice. Because if you had a choice, deep down you would have to admit to yourself what a scumbag you are. If you dared to do a self-evaluation, you wouldn't be able to live with what you found. Now you have no choice but to live with who you are for the rest of your pathetic life. But if I'm wrong, and you both really love each other, I'm sure it won't be long before your magical lover starts hinting that you're getting in the way of babysitting. He'll probably start with, "Why don't we just let Lewis take them more often?" Something like that. You won't argue with him because you won't want to give up fantastic sex. You told me the same thing when you said that I would have to share you with this parasite. If he finally threatens to leave you, After proposing, cajoling, and finally promising that he will leave, if you don't give the girls to me, well, then you'll be back to square one, isn't it? He smiled at her confusion. Either way, I win and you lose. It's only a matter of time. And I'm a patient guy. Lewis looked around the azure surface of the lake again. For a moment, the breeze died down. The water was like glass in the closet door. It's time to go. He swore to himself that he would return here often with his daughters. His girls loved it here, but it wasn't enough. He wanted them to love this place as much as he did. He stood up not because he was done with her, but because there was so much adrenaline in his body that his central nervous system would no longer allow him to stay still. He needed to discuss one last important detail with her. Lewis awkwardly walked around the bench. He placed his hands on the smooth, varnished teak on either side of Blaine's shoulders and grabbed it tightly. He slowly leaned down to whisper in her ear. In a quiet voice, full of gloating, he said with calm fury, "Tell your shitty boy that if I get even a hint or even the slightest suggestion that he is being inappropriate with my daughters, I will kill him. And it doesn't matter what it will be. Weed, sexual innuendo, just peeping at them in their nightgowns. I'm going to kill him. Tell him he won't have to sneak around or look over his shoulder for me, because I'll come at him head on. I want him to realize at the last moment that it was I who put an end to his miserable fucking existence on this earth." "The same goes for you, Blaine." His voice began to tremble. His throat hurt from tension. The pressure of his grip intensified as adrenaline kicked in with every word he spat at her. "You tell him this, Blaine." At the last word, there was a loud crack as the hardwood gave in to Lewis's death grip. Blaine shuddered sharply. Lewis looked down curiously at the shattered piece of lattice. Perhaps it was dry rot. For her part, Blaine didn't look at him. She didn't stop sobbing and whimpering. Her body was shaking as if she was suffering from hypothermia. "Remember, Blaine, 36 hours, not 37, and now I'm leaving." He looked at his hands. His nails were broken. His hands were bloody and littered with shrapnel. Strange. It doesn't hurt at all." He stared at Blaine silently for a moment. All he saw was an empty shell of something that had once been a person. He took one last look at his surroundings.